Hey friends, Peggy Hall back with you from thehealthyamerican.org. I titled this video, Maui's Host Family Program, inspired by Lenin's Russia. And just a little bit more than 100 years ago, the Russian Revolution took place, and it was very bloody. It was led by Lenin. And in a previous video recently, I talked about the Second Amendment and how important that is, that the population keep their ways of protecting themselves. And of course, that was one thing that they did in Russia, was eliminate the opportunity or the ability for people to have their bang bangs to protect themselves. And I'm not saying that might have, prevented the revolution from happening, but it definitely would have slowed things down, I believe. I predicted something like this would happen, what I'm about to share with you, many years ago. When Airbnb first came on the scene, I thought, this is a way for there to be a listing of people voluntarily putting out in public that they have a home or a room or more than one room available to rent. Now, I've used Airbnb. I've had some good experiences over the years staying in Airbnbs. I think it is actually a great alternative to a hotel. I also understand the downside of it. And I know that in Lahaina and in Hawaii in general, that a lot of these illegal Airbnb type situations were cropping up. And that also contributed to the difficulty for people finding a place to live. I know this happens in Europe as well, where in some of the tourist areas, like in just different European cities, that apartments that people would want to rent on a long-term basis, they're no longer available because they're being rented out on a short-term basis, whereby the person who owns it can make more money. Now, I am a person who is in favor of free market and less regulations and so forth. But the point that I'm getting at is that this Airbnb, I thought at the time, and it's coming true now, could be a way for the government to actually have a list of people to see who has a place. And the reason I was thinking about that is because think about the suffocation devices and the nasal assault and the pin cushion requirements and all of that. You're doing it for others. And I remember thinking, well, what would stop the government from saying, we're just issuing an order? There are so many homeless people. Oh, I don't think you can use that word anymore. In California, they call it people experiencing homelessness. And then I think in Hawaii, they were calling it houseless people. In other words, their tent and their sleeping bag was their home, so they weren't really homeless. They were houseless. And then another way of describing it is the unsheltered. And then somebody, a healthy American in Oregon, told me that they're called, are you ready for this one? Outdoor people. That's such a friendly term. And my heart does go out to those that are truly suffering, that are suffering from mental illness, from drug addiction. My heart does not go out to the criminals that should be behind bars. And there also are a number of people, healthy Americans among them, that have chosen to live not between four walls. They've chosen to live in their van or camp and have an alternative way of life. So there are those as well. The bigger picture I'm after is that during all of the hogwash in Orange County, California, there was a program called Operation Room Key, right? The key to a room. And the government got millions and millions and millions and millions, probably billions of dollars of your money and my money and money that they printed out of thin air. And that came from the federal government to the states. And then it flowed down to the counties. And one of the programs, and you might argue that this is a great program, I would like to look at it a little more carefully. And I might tend to agree with you that some of that money was used to pay for hotel rooms for the unsheltered outdoor people experiencing homelessness. And then they were put into these hotel rooms so that they would be off the streets. And then we, you and me, paid for that through money that was taken from us out of our paycheck. And every time we use our cell phone and buy gas and everything, all the other ways that we're taxed, that we can't keep our own money. And it has dawned on me that I think that's part of the reason that people experience homelessness is because they can't keep enough of the money that they earn, that it goes to the government. I digress. So there was a program whereby tax dollars, and there have been many, many, many programs over decades to try to solve this issue of homelessness. I've done previous videos on it. And the idea was that because cooties was floating around, that the people on the street would be far more susceptible to like just dropping over dead. And isn't it interesting? I don't know about in your community, but at least in California, we did not see this mystery illness sweep through the homeless community and knock them out. So that's good. The idea was that they wanted to put them in separate units so that they couldn't breathe on each other. And that was called Operation Room Key. And then I started to say to myself, you know what? They're going to expand that, and they're going to issue a government order, which you and I know is not a law, and you don't have to follow it because these executive orders are only for people who work in the government. And that this order would require you to take in people because you had an extra room. And that reminded me of the Russian Revolution in 1917, which had been brewing for a few years prior to that, where Lenin created this party, which he called the Bolsheviks, we the people, the party of the people, and they overthrew probably people like you and me that were actually, middle class. I don't even like to go by a class because we're not a classless, we are a classless society, but those who are earning more money and were living in nice homes. And yes, there were royalty and there were the elite and the upper crust, as there always have been, and there always will be. So one of the very first things that Lenin did is he decreed this law, this mechanism whereby people would come from the countrysides. And that's what they did. They fled the countryside, and they would be housed with other families in their apartments or in their homes. And in many cases, I'm going to read to you because I did a little research to prepare for this. And then I'm going to tie this all together because this is exactly, well, I'll just give you the punchline. The mayor of Maui, and darn it, I can't find the video right now, but the mayor of Maui came out yesterday and said, we have great news. We are announcing the host family program. And I hope to do a video for you on this tomorrow where I actually can find the news conference. And he says that many people out of their own compassionate hearts decided to take in those who were homeless because their homes were destroyed in this firebombing of Lahaina. And he said, we would like to pay people for doing that. So we are going to pay $375 per person that you house. Now, I don't know whether that's monthly. I assume that's monthly. And then he said there's a cap of $1,500 a month that a family can earn for housing the people that are homeless. He said, some of you have been doing it and you've been paying, for food and expenses. So we are going to use Red Cross money, and we are going to use other money that's been donated, and we are going to commit to this for 6 months. So for 6 months, you can earn this money by sheltering those who need it. Now, again, at the outset, it does sound like a compassionate remedy. Like, wow, that is really great. People were doing this anyway out of the kindness of their heart. It's great that they can get a few $100. I don't know how far $375 go when you've got people using your utilities and your food and wear and tear on your home and all of that. But it is a nice gesture. So I will give you that. That may be completely above board. And it's like, you know what? That's a pretty good thing. But that other part of my mind, I can't shut off. That part of my mind that goes back to the Russian communists after the revolution in 1917. So I'm going to read to you a little bit of this interesting story, and I will actually share my screen and show you. And when I was researching to prepare for this video, I actually got this off of NPR. Now, you know that NPR, well, you may not know, but NPR, National Public Radio, is a very liberal, left-minded media outlet. So they're not going to, if they're going to sugarcoat anything, it would be them. If they're going to say, this is fantastic, what Lenin did in Russia. So here is a woman living in a communal apartment in St. Petersburg in 1931. She started living there when she was 8 years old. And I will leave a link for you. It's called How Russia's Shared Kitchens Helped Shape Soviet Politics, which we know as communism. So I thought this was very interesting in terms of what happens to the psychology of people when there are a lot of people living in a small space. The government in Hawaii is now telling the hotels to kick the people out because they want tourists to come back. So the government has been paying the hotels for housing these people that have been displaced. I also brought you videos about the container cities, the container villages, where people are living in these containers, gosh, much like they do in Haiti. That's how they live in third world countries, in these containers. And now they've got this idea of, we'll just let the people house those that are displaced. And it doesn't have to be in Lahaina, but it may not even have to be on the island of Maui. I'm not sure. I have to dig a little deeper. But let me know what you think about the $375. They're calling it the Host Families Program. And they also said, even though they're only going to be, they're committed for 6 months to do this, they said that they believe it's going to take 2 to 3 years to be able to rebuild the city. And that's probably likely, or even longer. So here it is, okay? In the decades following the 1917 Russian Revolution, most people in Moscow lived in communal apartments, 7 or more families crammed together, where there used to be only one family. And they all shared one kitchen and one bathroom. They were crowded, stove space and food were limited. Clotheslines were strewn across the kitchen, and the laundry of one family dripping into the omelet of another. All right, I'm just reading this story from NPR. I get their liberal take on this. As the Soviet Union industrialized from the 1920s to the 1950s, millions poured into Moscow from the countryside. And one of the goals of the new government was to provide housing for the workers. Gee, I've heard of that before. What do they call it? Workforce housing. That is one of the cornerstones of these 15-minute smart cities, is to have workforce housing. Yeah, it all sounds like Russian communism to me again. The government started putting people into apartments that had been occupied by the rich or by aristocrats, meaning those people that had, through whatever gifts and talents God had given them, they had made something of them, of their life, and became rich. So the rich and the aristocrats were driven out by Stalin. All right. The communal apartment was like a microcosm of Soviet society, says Anya von Bremzen, author of Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking. Sounds very innocent. People from all walks of life. You can take her out if you want. Thank you. She doesn't like communism either. Yeah. By the way, I did a video yesterday about what I would say to socialists, like people who want everything for free. And it's interesting. You've got to see that video. You've got to read the comments, because there are so many people that are still arguing against capitalism. And I explain what capitalism is in that video. Capitalism is a word that's been hijacked by those who want to control you, and they want you to not have the ability to improve your life, and to increase your wealth, and to be a part of the free market, and to be an entrepreneur, and to hire others, and to contribute your ideas. They don't want that. They want you to be squished and squelched, and all of that. So I talk about it in my other video, but it's interesting how some of the socialists responded, and I would love for you to read their comments and to reply to them as well. All right. People from all walks of life, this writer says, sometimes absolute class enemies, were living next to each other. The expression was they were all densed up. I'm going to have to start using that expression. That's what they want to do in these rabbit hutches, as I call them. The stack 'em and pack 'ems that are going up all over as a part of Agenda 21, which is now Agenda 2030 is the deadline to implement those Agenda 21 goals of sustainability, resiliency, human settlements. I've spoken a lot about this United Nations push in many of my videos, and I think I'll do a standalone video. Some of you have been asking about that, just doing a deep dive into those goals and how they have such nice sounding names, but when you dig deeper, you see it's all about you being controlled and you not having liberty and freedom to decide what you want to do with your life. So they want to dense you up in these 15-minute cities. The allotment was 9 square meters per person. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but it was like 300 square feet. I don't even know if that's correct. A professor of Russian literature, Gregory Frieden, grew up in one of these communal apartments of 10 families in one apartment. Do you think this is where they're going with Maui? Now, remember, you have to consider this concept called incrementalism. And that's where things move really slowly. First, they get you conditioned to let the government know that you have extra rooms available on Airbnb, or maybe you even are a person that has a second home and you rent that out on VRBO. All of that is public knowledge now. Joshi from Green New Deal, he also had the government pay for some of those Airbnbs to house people in the aftermath of this horrible inflicted disaster. So the government knows who is there. And I also believe that the rapid growth of Airbnb was likely due to some government enhancements, and maybe not outwardly. There might have been some that had shell companies or shell investments, meaning we weren't told that that was from the government. Same thing with Amazon and Facebook and Twitter, all of that. It's very unlikely that that happened without any government assistance, because they use it for their benefit. So here we go. The professor writes, on one side of my room, well, here, let me show you the picture. Yeah, this is, picture's worth 1,000 words. Here we go. So this is one of those communal apartments where you've got the laundry strung in the kitchen. And then here he says, on one side of my room was the man who washed corpses at the local morgue. There were 2 other rooms where the mother and father served in the KGB, which was their secret police. Then there was the woman whose husband was serving a sentence for stealing bread from the bread factory where he worked. So this is the type of upbringing that he had. And let's see, I'm not sharing the screen any longer. All right, let me give you a couple more tidbits here to give you a taste of what it's like to live in the densed up situation. In this professor, when he was a boy, in that kitchen, every family had a small kitchen table that housed a few pots and pans. There were 2 4-burner stoves. Everyone cooked their own food: cabbage soup, borscht with beets, potatoes, buckwheat, groats, boiled chicken. Kitchens became a source of tension and conflict. 5 different kettles, 5 different pots that are all marked. They said when relations between the neighbors were especially fierce, you could see locks on the kitchen cabinets. Families cooked in quick, staggered shifts. They cooked in the kitchen, but practically never ate there. They would go with their pots along the corridor and just eat in their room. The communal kitchen was a war zone. During the Stalin era, the kitchen was the most dangerous place to be. Okay, and then Stalin came after Lenin. So that was Lenin was in place for about 10 years, 11 years, and then Stalin came in 1928 to 1953. And during that time, it continued. A lot of high density, and again, these were palaces and apartment buildings and just homes that were taken over by the government. Why? Because you shall own nothing and be happy. There are so many people that fled that communist regime. Many people died fighting it and trying to flee it. And I see that that's the incrementalism that they're imposing here. Let me read a little bit more, and then I'll leave a link for you. Communal kitchens were not places where you would bring your friends. He writes, I think that this was one of the ideas for creating a communal kitchen. There would be a watchful eye of society over every communal apartment. People would report on each other. You never knew who would be the ones doing the reporting. Okay, the other woman earlier I mentioned, Anya, remembers that in addition to that, there was some camaraderie. There was always a grandmother to take care of the kids. And when they began to disband the communal apartments, the communal kitchen was still an institution that many people actually began to miss. The reason the Soviet authorities considered kitchens and private apartments dangerous to the regime was because these were the places where people could gather to talk about politics. Think about 3 years ago, going on 4 years ago. What did they close down? The restaurants. They didn't. And what did they else did they do? They told you, you cannot go visit your friends. The grandparents couldn't visit the grandkids. You were not supposed to go outside of your home. It was so reprehensible. In Northern California, they were talking about, maybe where you live too, they were talking about living in your bubble. They actually used that word, that you should only do things in your bubble. That's so despicable, disgraceful, and reprehensible. It literally turns my stomach to think that the government would have the gall to tell you to live in the bubble. But even what's worse than that is those that went along with it and thought it was a great idea because they were scared out of their minds. They thought that anybody outside of the bubble was going to be a danger to them. This is exactly what they did in Soviet Russia. You were supposed to fear everyone else. So here in the United States, they also shut down the restaurants. You couldn't go to work. So suddenly you weren't able to gather and to talk about what was going on, only with your immediate family. And many of you told me that your family basically canceled you because you could see the truth and they couldn't. And just as an aside, friends, that's why I'm here day in, day out, because I want you to know that what you're seeing and what you're experiencing and what you're concluding, that I agree with you on, for the most part. Well, I don't know. Maybe I agree with you on all of it, but the point is that there are so many of us of like minds that can see through all of their hogwash. And that's why I like to come here to bring this information to you, to affirm and confirm and validate that what you're seeing is reality. So many people are saying, gosh, Peggy, my family won't even talk to me anymore. They think that I've gone off the rails. You haven't. You're seeing the truth of things. So listen to this. The most important part of kitchen politics in early Soviet time, as they actually wanted to have houses without kitchens because they didn't want people to gather. The kitchen is something bourgeois, right? Meaning upper class. Every family, as long as they have a kitchen, they have some part of their private life and they have some part of private property. Now, let me finish off by saying this. I've done videos on this channel linked in my Maui Fire playlist about what they're doing in Lahaina. They've created these container little villages, and it's not just in Lahaina. They're doing it all over Hawaii. And Joshi, Green New Deal, is 100% behind this, creating these little villages, as he calls them. And they're basically little prison cells. So there's room for a bed, and then you have a communal bathroom, and get this, a communal kitchen, just like in Soviet Russia. They don't want you to have your own private property. And you may say, Peggy, this is temporary. Oh, really? Exactly how temporary is this? In the subsequent years, Russia was one among many of the Eastern European countries that started these massive apartment building blocks. Now, I think of California like in the 40s and 50s and 60s, because prior to that, most people lived on the family farm or they lived in a small house. There were rooming houses where you could rent a room, but that was often seen as temporary and sort of sad, like, oh, it's too bad, you know, how sad that he's living in the rooming house. But once somebody got married, they usually moved into a home, or they lived in the family home where there were generations in one home, which I actually think is a brilliant idea in many cases. Think about that. If you have parents who are working and they have children, but their parents are at home, so the grandparents can take care of the children. You don't have to worry about any kind of hanky-panky going on with outsiders or any of that. And they could be educated at home in the family. And then when those parents get older and are no longer working and become grandparents, then their children have children and they can be with those grandchildren. And you didn't have to worry about having roommates and going bankrupt because you couldn't pay for your own apartment. I'm not saying it's a perfect solution for everyone, but I do see value. Let me know what you think. Over the years, I've changed a lot of my perspectives on things. And I was one person that went off to college at the age of 18. And from then on out was, living with roommates, and it cost a lot of money. And there are people to this day that are still living with their families in their family homes. And I'm not talking about the deadbeats. I'm talking about those that see value in the family home. So later, apartment buildings, I'm thinking of Los Angeles, Orange County, Southern California, let's say the 40s and 50s to 60s, these were very moderate, nice little apartment buildings, maybe 2 stories high, maybe 18 or 20 units. That was kind of the typical thing. So there was not the high density. It wasn't densed up, and they were quite nice. There was usually a swimming pool, at least in California, in the center of a courtyard, and they were called garden apartments, and they were spacious, and there was fresh air and greenery, and yes, grass, if you can believe it, which they're trying to outlaw in California, the exact opposite of what should be done in drought conditions, drought that was caused by you know what, their own patents on the weather. I can go off in so many directions, but the point is, there were not massive apartment buildings. There were not skyscraper apartment buildings, at least not in most places of the United States. Certainly in San Francisco, New York City, other places you would get these skyscrapers, Chicago, but that was very unusual, and that was in a major city. Now they're putting out these blocks of apartments in suburban areas, and it very much looks like the communistic approach that started in Russia. And they had so many problems, and they were called, communist block housing. And it would just go on for, however many stories. And again, there would be shared bathrooms in many cases, the shared kitchens, and it was just not a healthy way for people to thrive. It troubles me that in our communities, our society in the United States, that's exactly the road that they're driving on, which is this 15-minute city, smart city. They're not necessarily exactly the same, but they do share some commonalities. It's basically to limit you, to surveil you, to control you, to know where you're going, and to tell you that it's for your good, for the good of all, for your safety. And that is exactly how they enslave us. I'm not participating, and I know you're not participating. So that's what I've got for you about this host family program that reminds me of Lenin's Russia communist approach. All right, friends, wrapping up for today. Thank you so much for being on board. I've been telling you about my free Substack, and I want to thank all of you that have done that subscription. It's an easy way for me to just email you, and I will give you links to my videos. I'll give you analysis. There will be shorter little blurbs of, hey, did you catch this video? And then there will be deeper dives where I go into more analysis, and there are links where you can do more research as well. Sometimes I'll have a guest author who will bring you some information that I think will be of value. It's 100% free, but I also want to thank a number of those who have decided to do a paid subscription. That helps support my work. Most people have done $5 a month, and I really appreciate it. But if you don't have $5 to support, please don't send it. Just send your prayers, your encouragement. Watch these videos, share these videos, tune in with me. I start the videos around 4 p.m. Sometimes I have technical difficulties, but it's around 4 p.m. Pacific. 1 or 2 videos an evening for you, and then occasionally a bonus video or 2 on the weekend. There's so much that I want to cover with you, and I appreciate you letting me know the topics that are of interest to you as well. I've got my fire expert, Robert, coming back with me. There will be a part 1 and a part 2 for you next week. That will be Tuesday and Thursday. And then I've also got my expert in law, Dr. Graves, who has written a program called How to Win in Court. And I've been learning about that. I'm standing on my victories, and I will tell you all about that. And he'll also tell you what prompted him to distill all of his years of knowledge as an attorney, a good attorney, and as basically like a legal scholar, and he simplifies and distills it all down for you. I've learned a lot in that course. So that's what I've got coming up, friends. I just love hanging out with you, but I better wrap up for now. I want to thank the moderators who help keep this stream flowing. And as I say, I will take a look at your comments as in the next 24 hours. And then I look forward to seeing you right back here. Don't wait for a notification. And yes, I am on all of the backup channels, Rumble and BitChute and Brighteon. I've also got an Instagram channel if you'd like to see some of my little blurbs and a little extra snark and some funny memes. You can find me there as well. All right, friends, look forward to seeing you in an upcoming broadcast.